Hello, everyone. We'll get started in 1 second. Thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar today. Today, we're going to be talking about our 2018 Making Strides State Report Cards. My name is Michelle Lieberman. I'm the Senior Technical Assistance Manager with the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. I'll be your webinar moderator today, as well as one of the presenters. We're really excited to have you, all of you with us today as we share updated state report cards on support for walking, biking, active kids, and communities. A little bit about us, if you're not familiar with us, we're a national nonprofit organization that's working to advance safe walking and bicycling to and from schools, to improve the health and well-being of kids of all races, income levels, and abilities, and to foster the creation of healthy communities for everyone. And we do this through a number of avenues. A little bit about what we do. We improve quality of life for kids, families, and communities. We're advancing policy change at the federal, state, regional, and local levels. We're catalyzing support for safe, healthy, active communities and sharing our deep expertise through things like this webinar. Before we get started with the webinar presentations, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. On the left, you'll see the GoToWebinar viewer where you'll see the presentation. On the right is the control panel where you can raise your hand, ask questions, and select the audio mode you'll use. There's two options for listening to us today, telephone and mic and speakers. If you're having sound problems with one selection, try the other. And if you're still having issues with that, we'll do our best to field any issues. Just send us a message in that question box. Even though you're muted today, we really want to hear your input and get your questions. You can use the question box to ask speakers questions for the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. After viewing today's presentation, you might want to view it again, or you'll have the ability to send the link to other people. You can do this by going to our website, saferoutespartnership.org, clicking on the Resources tab at the heading, and clicking on the webinars in the list on the left side of the page. All of our past webinars are stored here for your viewing pleasure, and I think they're a really great resource, so I'd really urge you to visit this page. And now for our speakers. I'm joined today by a number of my colleagues who worked on the report cards. Again, my name is Michelle Lieberman. I'm the Senior Technical Assistance Manager with the National Partnership. I'm joined by Andy Facias, our Field Services Manager for the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. In this role, he works to advance the organization's core initiatives in California and nationally through technical assistance, resource development, program support, and outreach. Following Andy will be Margot Pedroso. Margot is our Deputy Director. She manages government relations, grassroots lobbying, policy research and analysis to advance safe routes to school, the national movement, and assists with partner outreach, fundraising, and strategic planning. And then finally, Sarah Zimmerman. Sarah is the Program and Policy for the Safe Routes, Policy Director for the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. She works to support communities in obtaining resources that they need to increase physical activity and safe walking and bicycling for children and adults. Sarah oversees the work of the program policy team in providing high-quality assistance and advice to low-income communities and other communities of different sizes and in different regions across the country. I'm going to start today's presentation with an overview of the report. So first, why state report cards? Our overall goal was to provide a snapshot of how supportive each state is of walking, bicycling, and physical activity for children and adults. The report cards acknowledge the strengths of each state and let advocates and government agencies understand how their state is doing, and in comparison to the great potential that comes through policy and other state-level supports for active, healthy living. The project was done in partnership with the YUSA, with funding from the CDC, to work on materials in support of the Surgeon General's call to action to promote walking and walkable communities. Our first state report cards were prepared in 2016, and our 2018 report cards are an update to the 2016 report cards. They continue assessment in a number of the same core topic areas and provide updated information on a number of the same indicators. We also expanded what's assessed in the topic areas I'm going to add some indicators in other areas that we think are key to understanding the breadth of state-level policy and supports that could be provided. In terms of the contents of the actual report, the report includes research on why walking, biking, and physical activity matter, describes our rationale for the state report cards. There's detailed explanations of the scoring indicators and core topic areas, and of course, the report cards themselves. Towards the back of the report are reflections and comparisons to the 2016 report cards. There's a number of maps illustrating key findings, and then also at the end, there's appendices with scoring and grading by state and additional scoring breakdowns for some of the indicators. So you may be looking for the actual report and the report cards. Really easy to find if you go to our website and scroll down. It's under a featured report section. If you click on the Making Strides icon and report right there, it'll take you to a page with a map. And to get your state report card, just click on your state and a PDF of the map will pop up. There's also a link on the left side with the report cover that shows, that'll actually go to the full report. And Molly's put that link into the chat box right now. Before we get into each of the core topic areas and indicators, I want to explain a little bit about how the scoring is set up. We looked at 27 indicators across 4 topic areas, and each of those indicators were individually scored. There was a total possible points of 200, and we provide a numerical score and a grade in each topic area, as well as an overall score and grade. The grading categories are shown here on the bottom: lacing up, warming up, making strides, and building speed. They recognize states' accomplishments as well as room for improvement. Most of the indicators are scored from 0 to 5, 10, or 15 points. There are a few indicators where states could receive negative points for a very detrimental action. Across all states, the actual scores received ranged from 37 to 185 points. This is a snapshot of one of the report card sheets. You can see on the left, there's the core topic areas in all capitals, as well as subtopic areas, and then in the middle are each of the indicators. On the right here, you can see the overall grade and score. So we're using Washington as an example. They received a total of 155 points out of 200. And then for each of the topics, core topic areas, there's a topic grade. You can see the number of points earned for each indicator, and then a subtotal for each core topic area. We'll return to this map and some overall reflections later on at the end, but just want to give you a little bit of a preview. This is the map showing the overall grades by state. There were only 2 states in the lacing up grading category, which is the lowest, and only 2 in the highest, the building speed category. That means most of the states are in the middle. So, a number of states have taken significant action to support physical activity. There's also considerable room for improvement in the core topic areas. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy first, and we're going to go through each of our core topic areas and the indicators included.
All right, thanks, Michelle. One second, I'm having a little bit of difficulty. All right. Now we're going to go through each of the core topic areas and describe the indicators and what we looked at in more depth. We'll start at the beginning with core topic area 1, complete streets and active transportation. In this section, we're looking at complete streets and active transportation as key arenas for states to demonstrate commitment and support for communities where people can easily be physically active. We know that state policies, goals, and guidance that promote walking, bicycling, and building streets that are safe for everyone who uses them play a crucial role in encouraging and enabling safe walking and bicycling. Additionally, we recognize each state has a great deal of control over its road, including how they're designed, which improvements are made, where new facilities are constructed. And it's decisions like these together that create roads and the built environment that we find in our communities and ultimately can influence whether or not children and adults choose to walk or bike. So overall, as you see on this the slide on this map here, based on our findings, there are 6 states that fell into the lowest lacing up yellow category.
Angie, I think we lost your sound.
Hey, Andy, are you here? We can't hear you. Michelle, do you want to go maybe to Margot's section and we can hop back to Andy when he gets back online?
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, Andy.
All right, I had to move to the computer audio. Sorry about that. All right, so starting again with this slide here. For this core topic area, we're looking at the state of Hawaii to learn more about where it both excelled and can aim to improve. Overall, the state had a total score of 48 out of 65 possible points, landing it in the second best category, making strides. Shown here is an overview of this core topic area and its 4 subtopics, which include complete streets policies, design for active transportation planning, and active transportation goals. We'll explore each of these subtopics in more detail, but I quickly want to highlight a couple reasons why we looked at these important measures. First, active transportation is a key strategy for children and adults to get recommended amounts of daily physical activity. About 60% of people who walk on a regular basis meet the physical activity guidelines, compared with 30% of those who do not walk regularly. We also know that the way our streets are designed can support or hinder active transportation and physical activity. So people with access to more and better quality sidewalks and bike lanes are more likely to walk and bike and meet physical activity recommendations. Let's begin by looking at the subtopic of complete streets policies. How did we evaluate complete street policies for the purposes of our report card? We looked at 4 specific indicators. First, we looked at if a state had adopted a complete streets policy. And new to this year's report, we considered the type of policy in place and recognized legislation as the strongest policy type, followed by Department of Transportation, DOT, policies. Our reasoning here is that legislation is more permanent and binding, while in contrast, Department of Transportation policies are more likely to get into specific details on courses of action, but have the potential to be rescinded or altered with changes in department leadership. The 3 remaining indicators examine whether or not the language and implementation strategies within a state's DOT policy demonstrates that they are taking a strong stand on complete streets. So as you see here, Hawaii did well on all 4 subtopics. Within the first indicator, we identified that Hawaii has adopted complete streets legislation. With the second indicator, we identified Hawaii has adopted a complete streets policy that includes mandatory requirements, or perhaps an area to improve upon does not have clear action or intent. The third indicator measures whether states have only addressed state agencies in complete streets practices, or whether they address other jurisdictions as well. And so Hawaii's policy does include language regarding jurisdictions other than the state DOT, and they received the full points. Lastly, looking at the implementation indicator, we found that Hawaii's policy addresses implementation, but could be improved upon by including 2 or more clear implementation steps. Moving on to our next subtopic, design for active transportation. Here we measured whether or not states had adopted or endorsed National Association of City Transportation Officials, NACTO, guidelines. In this subtopic area, Hawaii got 0 points because it does not endorse NACTO's urban bikeway or urban street design guides. What are these guides? They outline recommendations for bicycle and pedestrian improvements, And by adopting or endorsing the guide, states recognize best practices for accommodating people walking and biking, allowing roads within their states to include design elements based on the guides. It's also important to note that these guides are not just for urban states. States where, for example, there may only be a city or two are also adopting these guides. The NACTO guides are also a great resource if you're looking to understand terminology of different types of physical design aspects. Without the endorsement of these guides, cities, towns, state road engineers often lack the flexibility to make roads safe or comfortable for walking and biking. Active transportation planning is a new subtopic to this core topic area in 2018. With this, we looked at these plans as ways that states create a planning foundation that allows state agencies, regional and local partners to coordinate on supporting prioritized projects, policies, and programs. And so with this indicator, we found that Hawaii has adopted both, but separate, bicycle and pedestrian master plans, and they received the full 10 points. Moving on to the final subtopic in this core topic area, active transportation goals, where Hawaii did very well. The first indicator measures commitment to increasing safety. Hawaii has adopted a goal or goals to decrease both bicyclist and pedestrian fatalities and received the full 10 points. With the second indicator, we measured commitment to increasing the numbers or percentage of people walking and bicycling statewide. Again, Hawaii received the full 10 points as they've adopted goals to increase both walking and bicycling. Let's wrap up this core topic area by looking at overall outcomes. So overall, 34 states have some form of complete streets policy in place, with 2 states adopting new policies in 2017. Of these, 9 states have adopted both legislation and a DOT policy, 9 have adopted legislation only, and 16 have adopted a DOT policy only. So DOT policies are the primary tool that states rely on to implement complete streets policies. But we're encouraged to see that overall, half of the 34 states with a policy in place have made commitments through legislation. When it comes to the strength of states' complete streets policies, our 18 findings are similar to those in 2016. Of the 34 states that have adopted a policy, the clear majority, 30 states, include mandatory requirements. However, nearly half of these 30 states need to improve in terms of demonstrating action or intent. In addition, 26 states include language regarding jurisdictions other than state DOT in their approaches. 25 states address implementation, but of these, only 9 demonstrate 2 or more clear, actionable steps to support implementation. With our examination of bicycle and pedestrian planning, which is new to this report, we found that overall 36 states have some form of plan in place, of which the majority, 32 states, address both bicycle and pedestrian planning. Now I'll hand it over to Margot to discuss our next core topic.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy. So I'm going to move on and focus on the funding side of things, funding for safe routes to school and active transportation. So you can see our usual map there. This is specifically for this section. And as background, each state gets federal dollars to spend on biking and walking, but state departments of transportation, or DOTs, have a lot of discretion in whether and how they use those dollars. The choices that DOTs make about how they staff these programs, which projects they fund, and how quickly funding gets out the door has a direct impact on whether or not communities have access to funding to implement active transportation improvements. And so that's what we're going to look at in this section. You'll see from the map above that there are 8 states that fall into the lowest lacing up category, which is yellow, and they have the most room for improvement. 18 states are in the warming up or light green category, 17 in the dark green making strides category, and 8 are in the top category of building speed, which is blue. So I'm going to focus on Kansas as our example for this section. So you will see here kind of the overall scoring rubric. They landed in the second best category, which is making strides, with a total score of 42 out of 65 points. They're doing a lot of great work in getting funding out the door, but there are areas where they could improve, which we'll look at as we go through this. As you can see, there are 3 sections in this topic area, and I'll go over each of them in the following slides. And as Michelle mentioned at the beginning, the full report has the specific details for what each indicator means and the points assigned. So when you're looking at your own state, if you're wondering what a 3 is, please refer to the full report. So first is the active transportation section, funding section. This is where we're scoring states for how they implement the Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP. This section is identical to the 2016 report cards, other than a few tweaks we made into the wording for clarity and the overall points that are available. Hopefully you're aware of the TAP program, but if you aren't, it was created by Congress first in 2012 when they merged together 3 separate programs that supported safe routes to school, biking, and walking. And under TAP, states receive somewhere between $2 and $80 million a year from TAP, with lower populated states on the lower end there and higher population states getting more. And it's the major federal source of funding for active transportation. The federal government makes funding available to states, but then state DOTs must get the funding out the door to locals through a competitive process. So we assessed several aspects of their implementation. First, states are allowed to transfer up to half of their TAP money out of the TAP program to road and bridge projects. We discourage states from doing this because it strongly decreases the amount of money available for biking and walking. So in the first indicator, we actually dock states points if they have transferred money away from TAP. Kansas got a 5 here because they've transferred less than 10% of TAP funds. In the second and third indicators, award and obligation, states must hold a competition to award projects, and then they have to actually get the money out the door to help build projects through something called obligation. So that's going through the contracting and the regulatory process to allow the project to move forward. So Kansas got a 10 for awarding projects because they've awarded at least 4 years worth of TAP dollars, and they got an 8 for obligation because they've obligated at least 45% of TAP dollars. So they're doing a good job of holding competitions and making sure they have the staffing needed to get funding moving. States can also make it easier to get funding where it's needed most by adding equity considerations into how they choose projects and disperse funds. This is an area for improvement for Kansas because they didn't get any points on these last 2 indicators. We'd encourage them to consider giving extra points when they hold a competition to high-need communities, and also to find a way to put additional resources from state money into helping localities with the 20% match that's required for TAP projects. That can be a real barrier for low-income communities. If they had done those, it would have gotten them 5 points in each of these 2 categories. So then we move on to safe routes to school funding. What we're looking at here is the state's efforts to make it safer for kids to walk and bike to and from school through funding for safe routes to school projects. The first 2 factors are related to TAP, the program that we talked about on the prior slide. Safe routes to school is an eligible use of these funds, but not a required use of those funds. So what we're looking at in the first category is whether they provide special consideration for safe routes to school projects when awarding TAP funds. So it could be extra points in the application process for a safe routes to school project, or setting aside a chunk of TAP money to make sure it goes to safe routes to school. Kansas got 3 points on this first indicator, which means that they do give extra points or a priority to safe routes to school projects when awarding TAP money. The second factor is new for the 2018 report cards. We'd been hearing that fewer states were funding safe routes to school programming, non-infrastructure. So things like walking school buses, local coordinator staff, education to teach kids to walk and bike. So we looked at it and we docked states points if they do not allow non-infrastructure to compete for TAP funding. Kansas got the full 5 points here because safe routes to school programming is eligible for TAP money. And then the third item, we look at whether a state has state funding that they use for safe routes to school. Federal dollars are very limited and it's very competitive to access those. So we always want to encourage states to add more money if they can. Kansas got the full 5 points here because they have a state program that funds school zone improvements for small towns. And I finally want to note that we did remove a factor that we considered in the 2016 report cards, which was the state's obligation of the Safe Routes to School program. That program got merged into TAP more than 6 years ago, and so most states have maxed out their spending, and it was not really a determining factor. As a result, we lowered the points for the section slightly. And then finally, we looked at a state's non-monetary support for Safe Routes to School. This section is unchanged from the 2016 report cards. So first, we look at whether the state DOT has a staff person dedicated to implementing Safe Routes to School funding and projects. This helps make sure the dollars are accessible and that the state DOT has expertise on school safety. Kansas got a 4 out of 5 here, which means they have a Safe Routes to School coordinator, but they are not full-time. And secondly, we look at the kind of support and technical assistance they provide to schools and Safe Routes to School initiatives. Kansas got 2 points here because they provide help for local agencies when they're applying for funding. And in order to score 5 points, we'd have wanted to see them run something like a statewide resource center that helps schools all across the state run effective Safe Routes to School programs. And then finally, some reflections. I really wanted to look at trends comparing 2016 to 2018. Overall, states are doing better in getting TAP funding out the door and in supporting Safe Routes to School. Only 2 states, Vermont and Maryland, actually dropped down a scoring category. Most states stayed in the same category, but promisingly, there were 12 states that moved up 1 grade and 4 states, Delaware, Idaho, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island, that jumped 2 grades. Overall, we're seeing much higher rates of obligation, meaning projects are getting implemented and more states have held competitions to award funds. However, there are, unfortunately, individual states where DOTs are persisting and transferring large amounts of TAP dollars out, which really limits available funding for biking and walking in those states. On the positive side, we also saw a big increase in the number of states that are allocating state funding to Safe Routes to School. That increased from 6 states in 2016 to 11 in 2018. So we hope that that will continue. We did see a troubling issue with the new indicator that looked at whether a state allows Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure programming to compete for TAP. Nearly half of states do not allow this and thus only support infrastructure. Research shows that Safe Routes to School is more effective when you pair programming and infrastructure. So we'd like to see that turn around. And only 1/3 of states are setting aside funding or extra points for Safe Routes to School projects. And finally, looking at equity, only 1/3 of states give extra points or have a set aside for disadvantaged communities, and only 1/4 provide resources to help those communities with the required matching dollars. We'd like to see improvements in those areas to ensure that federal dollars are getting to where they're needed most. And with that, I will hand off to Sarah for the next section.
Hello, everybody. This is Sarah, and I'm so happy to be here talking with you about our state report cards today. We are just so excited about all the information that we have been able to bring together and provide for states and communities, and hope that you're enjoying them too. So I'm going to focus on our 3rd big topic area, which is our active neighborhoods and schools topic area. And I am going to successfully advance my slides. So this, just as you've seen in our other 2 topic areas, is our active neighborhoods and schools overall map of how states did overall. And with this topic area, it lets us drill down a little bit more into ways that states affect our neighborhoods and schools. And that, of course, plays a big role in the ability of children and families to be more physically active. So interestingly, I think when you look at this map, you can see that compared to the 2 previous maps that we looked at, there's actually a lot more states that are in that yellow and light green category, which are our bottom 2 categories, rather than the dark green and blue categories. So overall here, we have 45 states that are in those bottom 2 categories, 21 in the lowest category and 24 in the second lowest, and only 6 states in the highest 2 categories, with only 1 state actually being in that highest category. So I think that what that really tells us is that there is quite a bit of room. As you'll see, there's many promising things happening in this area, but there's really quite a bit of room for movement and for more to be done by states to support the health of kids and communities. So let's take a look at our subtopics and our indicators for the active neighborhoods and schools topic by looking at New Jersey's report card. So as you can see, there are 55 overall points that are available in this topic area, and New Jersey scored 35 out of those 55 points, which put it in the second highest category, the Making Strides category, for active neighborhoods and schools, and New Jersey also was in that same category overall, the Making Strides category. So there's 4 subtopics that are part of this core topic area, and you see those listed on the left-hand side. There's shared use of school facilities, school siting and design, physical education, and supportive neighborhoods for physical activity. So we are going to go through these one by one. So the first subtopic looks at policies around shared use of school facilities, and this subtopic has not changed since 2016. It's the same that we looked at then. Most people are familiar with the concept of school shared use agreements. These are agreements that open up school playgrounds, school fields, other recreational facilities for use by community members outside of school hours, so that we're taking full advantage of the resource that schools are in our communities. And shared use agreements can be especially critical in neighborhoods that don't have as many parks or playgrounds, since it's a really important way to be able to easily increase availability of places for physical activity. Now, shared use agreements usually happen at the local level, but supportive state policies can make a really big difference in overcoming fears at the local level and in incentivizing action. So we looked at two different indicators that related to state policy around shared use. The first one was, has the state adopted a state policy that supports shared use of school facilities? So there were 10 total points for this indicator, and to get all 10 points, the state must have adopted legislation that requires schools to allow that kind of access. If they didn't adopt any legislation on this at all, then they get 0 points. And here we see that New Jersey got 6 points. That's because it does have legislation on encouraging schools to open up their facilities for shared use, but it doesn't require them to do so. So it got that kind of middle ground of points. The second indicator here looks at whether or not a state provides funding or some other kind of incentives to encourage and support the shared use of school facilities. So here, if a state did provide funding or incentives, they got 5 points. If they didn't, then they got 0 points. And New Jersey fell into the first category and so received 5 points. The school siting and design subtopic looks at what kinds of policies states have that affect school siting decisions by local school districts. This is a new indicator and a new subtopic area for 2018 and required a really substantial amount of outreach and research to pull together and analyze and obtain all of this information. We think this is really crucial information and are excited about it. So there's 2 indicators that we included here. The first indicator looks at whether or not states are requiring large school sites through a requirement known as a minimum acreage guideline. So this is a negative policy that lots of states used to have that really required these inordinately large school sites. And many states have now gotten rid of those guidelines, but some still have them. So unnecessarily large sites are something that we really discourage because they not only drive up the cost of building new schools or contemplating renovation of schools, but it also means that new schools can't fit into neighborhoods where students actually live. And so instead, new schools end up getting located sort of far away from residential areas, on the outskirts of towns, or in other kinds of undeveloped areas, and make it very challenging for students to walk and bike. So states can only lose points for this policy, and they can lose up to 10 points if they have negative policies that affect the elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. But here, because New Jersey does not have any minimum acreage guidelines, it didn't lose any points at all. It got a commendable 0. Our second indicator here looks at whether or not school siting guidelines include some different factors that support really positive decisions by local school districts. So first, we have the potential for losing points for those negative requirements, and then we also looked at the opportunity to gain points by having positive requirements. So we have separate points available for each of the different factors that we looked at, and we looked at 4 different factors. So these were, do state school siting or design guidelines have criteria that encourage consideration of walking, biking, or safe routes to school. The second was, do they encourage the co-location of school sites with parks or community centers? And that idea of co-location being encouraging school sites to be located next to or very near to a park or some other sort of facility. Next, we also awarded points if the guidelines limited or discouraged really large school sites. So it's limited the maximum size of a school site. And then finally, we awarded points if the guidelines required that a minimum part of the acreage of a school site be devoted to playgrounds, exercise facilities, or outdoor play spaces of some kind or another. So this indicator was worth 15 points altogether. And New Jersey included only one of those 4 different considerations that I had mentioned in its school siting and design guidelines. It included the requirement that there be a minimum outdoor play space available in schools, but it didn't address the other 3, so it got just 3 out of the available 15 points here. The next subtopic is physical education. And physical education, of course, is important because strong PE programs really provide this unique opportunity for kids and youth to get physical activity on a regular basis, as well as enabling them to learn different kinds of skills and habits that may stay with them for a lifetime and really support their health. So in 2016, we looked at physical education, but we had a different PE indicator. The one that we looked at then had already been adopted by almost all states, and it just didn't do a good job of helping us differentiate between states that had strong programs and states that had much weaker programs. And so our new indicator has a number of different parts. And so it looks at how many minutes of PE are required for each grade range, as well as whether or not the state awards PE credits for high school graduation. State laws and regulations can mandate that schools require that students meet recommended weekly numbers of minutes of physical education for their grade range. And the recommended levels are 150 weekly minutes for elementary school age kids and 225 weekly minutes for middle and high school age kids. And so we awarded states a range of points based on how close they got to those recommended minutes for each grade level. As you can imagine, the states really had a range of different numbers of minutes that they required. And here New Jersey got 13 out of 15 points for this indicator overall. That was actually the highest score of any state in the country in this PE category. It just lost 1 point from the middle and high school categories because it was just under the recommended levels. But as I said, it had stronger requirements than any other state. So good job, New Jersey. All right, and then our final subtopic for this big topic is looks at supportive neighborhoods for physical activity. So our report cards primarily look at policy indicators. We're mostly looking at what states do to support strong policy. But this topic includes 2 environmental indicators that look at on-the-ground access to parks and recreation centers where children and families can be physically active, because we wanted some measures that really actually assessed how things are on the ground. So we looked at 2 indicators. The first indicator looks at the level of access for youth to recreation and community centers. And we had to change this indicator a little bit from 2016 because the survey that we draw this information from had changed the questions that they asked. The second indicator looks at level of access to parks. That data comes from the CDC's National Environmental Public Health Tracking Network and looks at the percentage of a state's population that lives within half a mile of a park. And as you see, New Jersey scored well overall in both of these. There is the opportunity to improve their score by increasing the number of parks that are close to where people live. So just a few quick reflections. First of all, when we look across all the states in the category of shared use, we really see some tremendously encouraging improvements. So more states are adopting shared use policies, and the number of states that are providing funding or incentives for shared use went from 2 to 13. So really significant improvement there. We're delighted by that trend and are excited to see even more improvement happen. And then focusing in on our school siting, as I mentioned, this is really an opportunity to do an overview of how states are doing generally on the topic of school siting. This is the first overview that had happened in this field for more than a decade. And what we saw overall is that 13 states still have detrimentally large minimum acreage guidelines. So of course, that's more than we want, but that means that 37 states and DC don't have any such guidelines, which is really, really great. We also saw that half of the states encouraged consideration of positive factors in school siting. So those walkability or co-location considerations that I had mentioned before. However, most states only require 1 or 2 such considerations, and the requirements themselves are often quite weak. So terrific trend, a lot of opportunity for improvement there. Final reflection on this topic area is that the topics that Andy and Margot discussed both really look primarily at actions that are taken or affect state departments of transportation. But this section and the next section as well, both kind of look beyond departments of transportation and start looking at other state agencies and local agencies that have the potential to be influenced by decisions that get made. And so that just opens up a wealth of opportunities to create change with different stakeholders and get investment from additional folks out there. So now I will pass it over to Michelle for our final topic.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to move to the last core topic area, which is physical activity planning and support. Again, I'm going to show a map showing the overall scores in this core topic area. States did really well here. There are 17 states in the building speed category and only 3 states in the category of lacing up. So I'm going to go ahead and use Tennessee as an example here. This is our smallest section, both in terms of the number of points and indicators, but really an area that states can have a powerful impact on physical activity when they devote appropriate attention and resources. So these indicators are all about the efforts that state government agencies can undertake to coordinate effort across agencies, plan for strategies to increase levels of physical activity across the state. Efforts are often led by the governor's office or the health department, or it could really be a number of state agencies working together. So I wanted to point out that we are looking specifically at state plans and availability of state staff to really work on physical activity. Oftentimes we see that states have obesity prevention or more general health plans that may not include physical activity as a strong strategy. So we're really looking at the focus within those plans on specifically physical activity. So let's look at the first indicator, adopted a state physical activity plan. This could be a statewide plan focused specifically on physical activity or including physical activity in a substantial way in another stable plan like an obesity prevention plan. States could either get 0 or 5 points here. And the second indicator looks at if a state has staff focused exclusively on physical activity at the state level, typically within the public health department. Dedicated staff means there's more staff time spent on physical activity and that the staff has really expertise in the area. 10 points are awarded for states who have staff focused on physical activity exclusively. 6 are awarded if they focus on physical activity as well as other responsibilities, and then 0 if there aren't any staff focused on physical activity. So you can see here that Tennessee earned all the possible points in both indicators, putting them in the building speed category for this topic area. So in terms of reflections for this core topic area, many states have physical activity plans and staff supports in place. We saw that 39 states had some sort of plan that addressed physical activity in a meaningful way, and 45 states have staff who work on physical activity as part or all of their position. We also see that states who had lower overall scores and lower scores in other topic areas are really doing well in this topic area. So it may indicate that there's potential for great growth to build upon having these plans and staff resources in place to make change in other areas as well. So that's all for our core topic areas. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah to give some overall reflections for the report.
Hello again, everybody. So I'm just going to share a few overall reflections about these reports, and then we will go and do some Q&A, some questions and answers. So some overall reflections from these report cards. So first of all, in 2018, we see the continuation of a few major trends that we had noted in the 2016 report cards. So first of all, when it comes to overall scores, we see that the majority of the states are in those middle score categories, the warming up and making strides. And we only have 2 states that are in the highest category and only 3 states in the lowest category. So although the position of a given state may have moved up or down a category, this is actually very close to the distribution of the 2016 report cards. Similarly, we saw almost identical average scores across all of the different indicators between 2016 and 2018, even though we added new indicators and we saw changes in how some individual states performed. Overall states still were doing pretty much the same. Interestingly, when we look regionally, we saw that the Western and Mid-Atlantic states, again, showed the highest overall scores. In 2016, the Northeast had somewhat lower scores, but it joined the Western and Mid-Atlantic states in 2018 in that higher category. In contrast, the Midwest moved down a little bit, joining the South and Mountain West states and showing the lower scores overall. So hopefully we'll see improvement for our next round for those. We also saw, however, that even though the sort of overall picture looks fairly similar, that when it came to looking at specific indicators, there really had been, as you heard us reflect on throughout the discussion, significant improvement in how states overall are performing on many of those specific indicators. So that is great news. And of course, the big picture here is that we're delighted to see that when we look at these, all states have taken some really important steps and done some really great things to support healthy kids and healthy communities in their state, but that there's a lot of opportunities for advocacy and for making change in every state at the same time. So next slide. So of course, we're so excited about everything that we pulled together for these report cards, and we're really excited for people to use the report cards in order to make change and support those healthier communities. So we've developed a couple different fact sheets that just quickly help you understand all of these different complicated nuances of the scoring that we just explained to you here in more of a quick at-a-glance kind of a way. And another fact sheet that also sits down and really walks you through a wide array of different ways that you can use the report cards to make some change. So just a few highlights on what we really recommend to you around how to use these to make change. We think that it's great for you to sit down, look at your report card, really analyze it, and figure out where your state's doing well and where are areas that your state could improve, and then do some really strategic thinking about choosing 1 or 2 areas that you want to focus on to help your state improve. So of course, as you're doing that, you want to consider a variety of factors, including things like your political climate, your decision maker allies, what your stakeholders really care about, what they're invested in, as well as where you can leverage the fact that some of your nearby states may have performed better in that specific area on the report cards to drive some desire for change in your state. Then we really encourage people to connect with different partners in the state and develop an overall campaign plan about how to encourage change in your state and hopefully help your state improve its score so that we see great improvement for 2020. So we will stop there and use the rest of the time that we have for Q&A.
All right. We have a number of questions coming in the question box, and feel free to add yours to it, and we'll try to get as many answered as possible. I'm going to hop up and go back to the second core topic area, and this question's from Margot. Can you talk about the time periods that you were looking at for the TAP transfers?
Yes, we ran all of these through the end of last year, so December 31st. We looked at all the data through December 31st, and then in this early spring, late winter, we followed up individually with each state to confirm the data. So it is very possible your state could have not transferred anything since then or done another transfer since then. We do quarterly tracking of state transfers and spending, which are accessible in the federal policy section of our website. So you can keep up with this in between the report cards.
Great. Thanks, Margot. You answered 2 of the questions. A question for Sarah. Can you talk a little bit more about the shared use incentives and funding? What do those look like, and where are those coming from?
That's a great question. So the shared use incentives and funding can take a few different forms. Some of what we see with, I think the funding category often involves having a pot of funding that localities are only eligible for if they have shared use policies in place. Other times there may be more of a process that the funding supports on the local level for that locality to access the funding, and then as part of the what it's using the funding for, pass a shared use policy or a shared use agreement at the local level as part of that. Other kinds of incentives can, include technical assistance and different kinds of opportunities that localities are only eligible for if they do pass shared use policies.
Great, thanks, Sarah. A question for Andy on Complete Streets. Can you talk a little bit about more of the implementation steps within a Complete Streets policy and why it's important to include them?
Yeah, sure. So adopting a complete streets policy is a great initial step to providing roads that can accommodate all users. But implementation actions are really necessary to show a commitment to actual change on the ground taking place. So you want to ensure that these are actual tools being used and not just sitting on a shelf. Some implementation steps could include, for example, establishing deadlines to adopt procedures, guidelines that implement the policy. Can also include setting progress and review milestones to ensure that performance around implementation and certain standards are being met, which also allows for evaluation to make sure change on the ground is again occurring. And then third example could be outlining education programs for staff and external agencies and partners, providing training information around complete streets and areas of shared responsibilities.
Great, thank you. Margot, I have another question regarding TAP and setting aside funds for safe routes to school. Can you explain how this works a little bit, even though there needs to be a competitive selection process?
Sure. So the Transportation Alternatives Program, basically at the federal level, there are sort of overall guidelines that a state has to operate within, in terms of what's eligible for funding, but they actually have a lot of flexibility in how they actually administer the program. So they have to have a competition, but it doesn't say how many or for what. So a state can choose actually to run two separate competitions, one for safe routes to school projects, one for other kinds of projects. And they can set aside, some of their money from TAP in order to fund exclusively safe routes to school projects. They could also run just one competition, but really at the DOT level decide, we want to set aside 10, 15, 20, 25% of our TAP money for safe routes to school projects. So those do not have to be done through legislation. These are decisions that can be made at the DOT level with encouragement from advocates. So we do have a number of states that set aside a portion for safe routes to school. The other way that they can support it without setting aside money is simply to prioritize these projects, give them 5 or 10 extra points in the application process so that they are more likely to rise to the top.
Great, thank you. Let's see, okay, there's another question regarding state physical activity planning. I'll go ahead and answer that. There was an indicator in the 2016 version regarding dedicated governor's council for physical activity, and that was removed. And we did remove the indicator, really finding as we were talking with state agencies and with people across the country that configurations of governor's councils or sort of those type bodies were really different from place to place, and how they were being used and the effectiveness and what they're doing really varied. So we took out the indicator because we didn't want to have an indicator that specified something that really wasn't indicating necessarily the same level of engagement or commitment in all the states. So that answers that question. I have a couple more questions. This one I will pose to Sarah, and then maybe Margot actually might have some thoughts as well. So how is this data in the report cards and the report being used at the national level to support change, specifically around school siting, but any of the other topics as well?
That's a great question. We certainly use it as an organization to help us understand what's going on sort of on the national picture, understand what regions of the country and what states really have some work to do in different areas. That lets us then ourselves and with the other national partners that we work with make strategic decisions about where to invest our resources, where to spend more time working with local and state advocates to make change. And it certainly helps inform us about questions about what areas local advocates and state advocates should be working on when they want to see change. When it comes to something like school siting that we really had such an absence of understanding on for a long time, it also just gives us a strong understanding of what the landscape looks like. So what's the basic situation that we're dealing with here? So knowing that we only have 13 states that still have negative minimum acreage requirements lets us know that while, that's something that we want to work with the states on, we want to keep on, explaining and providing more resources about what to replace that with and how to do better. It helps us understand that that isn't necessarily, where we want to go all in terms of our resources, and that really there's a lot of opportunity for helping states improve those positive school siting considerations that they look at. Margot, you want to add some thoughts?
Sure. I would say there are two key ways that we use the data from the report cards nationally. First, I would say because some of the data in the funding section I'm actually tracking quarterly, I'm sort of continually keeping an eye on states that may be suddenly transferring money when they've never transferred money before, or where they're pretty slow on obligating and it looks like some of the funding may be at risk. So we try to highlight that throughout the year and alert advocates in appropriate states if we think there's something that they need to take action on. Because the best way we make the case for a program like TAP continuing is for states to use it and for local communities to get funding and get projects built, because then members of Congress see that, change is happening on the ground and that this money is wanted. The other thing that we do is, it may seem like we just finished a transportation bill, which was the FAST Act, but it actually expires in September of 2020, which is just over 2 years away. So we are already starting to work with some of our national partners to look at data like this and really understand ways in which TAP could be improved to make sure that safe routes to school biking and walking is getting funded and that DOTs are using the dollars. So you'll hear more about that in the future because we're just now starting that process. But, starting in 2019, we'll be starting to talk with members of Congress about things we'd like to see improved about TAP. And this informs that discussion.
Great. Thank you both. We have just a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to answer one more question. A question came in about, actually a few questions about how to get more information on specific language related to different policies and how to engage with us more about this. So like we've mentioned, the report is available on our website. There are a number of description sections related to specific indicators, as well as the 2 fact sheets that Sarah mentioned. So I would really encourage you to take a look at that alongside your state's report card. And if you have additional questions or want to reach out about collaboration on any of these topics, please feel free to contact any of us. Our contact information is on the website as well. A couple of wrap-up things. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website within the next couple of days. We'll also be sending a follow-up email with a survey. Please take our survey. It really helps us understand what was helpful, what we could improve on, and what she would like to see from our webinars in the future. And last, we have a webinar next month related to safe routes to parks, and we encourage you to sign up for that. That's on July 24th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. So thank you very much for joining us today. We're happy to share the report cards with you.